There are people who walk into a room and, without saying a word, change everything. The air shifts. Conversations pause. Eyes drift in their direction. Something in the nervous system responds. Some ancient, pre-rational faculty that doesn't wait for permission. You felt it. Perhaps when you were young, perhaps last week. Someone crossed your path and you found yourself thinking about them for days afterward. Their voice, the way they listened, the feeling that in their presence you were somehow more alive. What is that? What creates that quality? It isn't beauty. The world is full of beautiful people who leave no trace. It isn't wealth or status, though both can help. It isn't even talent or intelligence. History is littered with brilliant minds who died alone, while others of ordinary gifts became legends. Robert Greene, in his meticulous study of human nature, spent years asking this question. He read the private letters of Casanova. He studied the court of Cleopatra. He examined the cultural mythology of Marilyn Monroe, the magnetism of John F. Kennedy, the unstoppable charisma of Duke Ellington. And across all of them, across centuries and cultures and radically different circumstances, he found a pattern. Seduction, he argued, is not about beauty. It is about psychology. It is the ancient, human art of awakening emotion in another person, making them feel something they cannot quite name, cannot quite resist, and cannot quite forget. Today, we are not here to talk about dating tactics or romantic manipulation. We are here to explore something far more fundamental. Why are some human beings magnetic? What does fascination tell us about the human mind? And what can understanding these forces teach us about who we are and who we most want to become? This is the psychology of the unforgettable. Section 1. The human hunger for attention. We live in an age of unprecedented connection, and yet an epidemic of loneliness. You can have 10,000 followers online and feel invisible. You can sit at a table full of people and feel utterly alone. The modern world has given us more ways than ever to be seen, and yet somehow the feeling of being truly seen, truly known, has never felt more rare. This is not a modern invention. It is the oldest ache in the human story. Greene understood that seduction, in the broadest, most philosophical sense, begins not with the person who attracts, but with the hunger of the person who is attracted. Every fascination is, at its root, a response to an unmet need. The need to be recognized, the need to be understood, the need to feel that you matter, that your presence in this world has been noted by someone, somewhere. Consider how differently we respond to a person who truly looks at us when we speak, not glancing at their phone, not waiting for their turn to talk, not scanning the room for someone more interesting, just present, attentive, fascinated by whatever we are saying. Something in us opens toward that person, immediately, instinctively. Why? Because they have met one of our deepest psychological needs. They have made us feel, for a moment, that we exist, that we are worth knowing. This is the first and most important lesson of Greene's work. Fascination is not something you create in yourself. It is something you create in other people. The magnetic individual doesn't dazzle others with their brilliance. They awaken others to their own significance. And here lies a profound irony. The person who makes others feel interesting is almost always perceived as the most interesting person in the room. The ancient Romans had a word for it, gratia, a quality of grace that drew people close, that made others feel elevated simply by proximity. It had little to do with physical beauty or inherited power. It was a quality of attention, of emotional generosity, of the rare ability to make the people around you feel, however briefly, that they were the only person in the world. This is where seduction, properly understood, begins. Not in attraction, but in understanding what people are hungry for. Section 2. The Power of Mystery. In 48 BC, Julius Caesar, the most powerful man in the world, arrived in Alexandria, Egypt, having just crossed the Mediterranean with a fleet of warships. Cleopatra was 21 years old, exiled from her own kingdom by her brother's allies, with no army and no safe way into the palace where Caesar waited. So she did something remarkable. She had herself rolled inside a carpet. A trusted servant carried her through the enemy lines and unrolled her at Caesar's feet. The meeting that followed changed the ancient world. Cleopatra was not, historians tell us, the great beauty of legend. Ancient coins show a strong nose, an angular jaw. What she possessed was something far more compelling, a presence that felt mythological. She spoke 9 languages. She studied philosophy, astronomy, and military strategy. She dressed as the goddess Isis. She constructed encounters as elaborate theater, each one carefully staged to awaken wonder in the person she needed to persuade. She understood, intuitively, brilliantly, the psychology of mystery. We are drawn to what we cannot quite understand. We want to know more about what we cannot entirely see. The human mind, at its most fundamental, is a prediction machine, constantly trying to model the world around it to anticipate what comes next. And when it encounters something it cannot fully predict, something it cannot categorize and file away, it fixates. It leans in. It wants more. Predictability is the death of fascination. Think of someone you found magnetic. Part of what held your attention was probably a quality of inexhaustibility, the sense that there was always something more to discover, another layer, another depth. They revealed themselves gradually, selectively. They knew what to leave unsaid. Casanova, perhaps history's most studied seducer, was not particularly handsome. Contemporary descriptions vary wildly. What he possessed was an extraordinary ability to make each person feel they were witnessing a private performance, that they alone were seeing the real man beneath the mask. He was different things to different people: philosopher, rogue, romantic, mystic. He could not be pinned down or exhausted. Marilyn Monroe understood this at an instinctive level. She was, in person, reportedly warm, funny, almost luminously ordinary. But she could turn something on, a shift in quality of presence, a way of being in her own body that transformed her into something otherworldly. She played with the distance between what she revealed and what she withheld. The philosopher Simone Weil wrote that attention is the rarest and purest form of generosity. But there is another dimension to this. To be the object of someone's attention, to feel their gaze fixed upon you, trying to understand you, is intoxicating precisely because it is rare. Mystery does not mean coldness. It does not mean playing games. It means having a rich inner life that cannot be easily summarized, and choosing to share it selectively, in moments, in glimpses, rather than all at once. The person who tells you everything about themselves in the first hour leaves you nothing to discover. The person who leaves you with the feeling that you have barely scratched the surface makes the imagination do what no amount of persuasion ever could. And it is imagination, far more than reality, that creates fascination. Section 3. The Seductive Characters. Greene identified a series of what he called seductive characters, not roles to be performed mechanically, but emotional templates, ways of being in the world that seem, again and again across history, to magnetize others. Understanding them is not about imitation. It's about recognizing what psychological needs they fulfill and asking which of those qualities might already live, undeveloped, within you. Consider the natural. These are the people who seem to have never quite been socialized out of their childhood directness. They say what they feel. They delight openly. They are moved visibly by things that move them. In an adult world of managed impressions and professional masks, there is something disarming, almost shocking, about a person who hasn't learned to pretend. We project onto them a kind of innocence we mourn in ourselves. Their presence reminds us of something we have lost, or perhaps buried, and that longing makes them magnetic. The charmer operates through a different mechanism. Where the natural attracts through authenticity, the charmer attracts through attention. They understand, with rare precision, what you need to hear, not flattery exactly, but recognition. The charmer makes you feel that your particular way of seeing the world is not only valid, but fascinating. In a world where most conversations are really just two people waiting to talk about themselves, the charmer is genuinely, thoroughly interested in you, or at least makes you feel that way. The coquette is perhaps the most misunderstood archetype. We often think of the coquette as manipulative, even cruel, but the deeper dynamic is more interesting. The coquette gives and withdraws, advances and retreats, creating a rhythm of hope and doubt that keeps the mind constantly engaged. This isn't sadism. It's an understanding of a basic psychological principle. We value what we have to earn. We cherish what we cannot be certain we have secured. The ideal lover represents something different entirely. These are people who understand your dreams, your self-image, the person you most want to believe yourself to be, and who reflect that version of you back to you. The ideal lover does not seduce you by being extraordinary. They seduce you by making you feel extraordinary. And then there is the charismatic, perhaps the most awe-inspiring of Greene's archetypes. The charismatic seems lit from within. They move through the world with an absolute conviction in their vision, their cause, their own destiny, that makes others want to be near them, to be part of whatever they are building. Duke Ellington had this quality. He treated every collaboration as though it were the most important artistic act in history. He was so certain of the beauty of what he was doing that everyone around him began to feel it too. His musicians were not just playing jazz, they were, in Ellington's universe, doing something sacred. John F. Kennedy had it on a political scale. Whatever your politics, whatever history's final verdict, in person, Kennedy created the feeling that the future was something you and he were going to build together. That his vision was not just his, but somehow yours too. The lesson running through all of these archetypes is the same. They do not primarily attract through what they are. They attract through what they make others feel. That is not technique. It is emotional intelligence. Section 4. Why people fall under influence. Here is one of the most uncomfortable truths in Greene's work, and in psychology more broadly. We rarely fall under the influence of what someone actually is. We fall under the influence of what we project onto them. When you find yourself captivated by a person, something remarkable is happening beneath the surface. Your mind is not simply receiving impressions, it is constructing them. You are filling in the gaps of what you don't know, with fantasies drawn from your own hopes, needs, and unresolved longings. The object of your fascination becomes a canvas, and what you paint on that canvas reveals more about you than it does about them. This is not weakness. It is a deep feature of how human beings process social reality. We are, at our core, storytellers, and when we encounter another person, we cannot help but begin to write them a story, place them in a narrative, assign them a role. The most magnetic people intuitively understand this, even if they cannot articulate it. They create what psychologists call a projective space, an openness, a sense of depth and possibility that invites you to project your fantasies onto them, to find in them whatever you most need to find. Cleopatra didn't just dress as Isis for theatre. She knew that if you present yourself as something mythological, something larger than ordinary human categories, people will make you mythological. She gave Caesar, and later Mark Antony, the space to believe they were dealing with something divine, and they were glad to believe it. It served their own sense of destiny. Ego plays a central and underappreciated role in fascination. We are drawn to people who validate our deepest story about ourselves. The person who seems to confirm that we are, in fact, the protagonist of this story, special, worthy, chosen, holds an almost irresistible power over us. Validation is not a trivial thing. It is a fundamental human need, as deep as hunger. And people who understand how to offer it authentically, who can see past the performed self to something real underneath, become extraordinarily difficult to resist. But here is where it becomes important to stay clear-eyed. If we are attracted not to a person, but to our projection of them, then what we are truly longing for is often something within ourselves. The quality we most admire in the people who fascinate us is frequently a quality we are afraid to claim in ourselves. The poet, Rainer Maria Rilke, said that we are all attracted to the being we have not yet become. And perhaps that is truest of all in the people who hold our gaze the longest. Understanding this is not cynical, it is liberating. Because once you understand the projection dynamic, you can begin to notice when you are falling for a story rather than a person. And you can also begin to ask, what does this particular fascination teach me about myself? Section 5. The ethical side of seduction. We have to talk about ethics, because everything we've discussed so far exists on a spectrum, and on one end of that spectrum is beauty, and on the other is something we should name clearly: manipulation. Robert Greene's work walks a difficult line. He documents techniques, the deliberate creation of mystery, the strategic use of projection, the careful management of attention, that can be used with extraordinary integrity or with genuine cruelty. The knowledge itself is neutral. What determines its moral character is what drives it. There is a meaningful distinction between influence and manipulation. Influence, at its best, is the natural result of genuine presence. When you are truly interested in someone, when you bring your full self to an encounter, when you listen without an agenda, when you give your honest attention, you influence people, naturally, unavoidably. And that influence does not diminish them, it enlivens them. Manipulation is different in kind, not just degree. It operates in the dark. It exploits rather than meets. It uses the vulnerabilities of another person, their longing for connection, their need for validation, their desire to be seen, as levers to produce an outcome they would not freely choose if they saw it clearly. The difference is visible in the aftermath. The person who has been genuinely influenced comes away feeling more themselves, more alive, more capable, more seen. The person who has been manipulated comes away feeling, eventually, hollowed out, ashamed, like they gave something away that was taken rather than offered. True charisma, authentic magnetism, has nothing to do with trickery. It is, at its root, an expression of genuine self-possession. The person who has developed a rich inner life, who has sat with their own fears and examined them, who knows what they value and why, who has cultivated real curiosity about other human beings. That person does not need to manufacture mystery. They are genuinely complex. They do not need to pretend interest. They are genuinely curious. They do not need to withhold themselves for strategic effect. They have learned, through experience and reflection, how to share themselves with precisely calibrated generosity. Emotional intelligence is the true foundation of personal magnetism. Not charisma as performance, charisma as a byproduct of self-knowledge and genuine interest in others. What does this mean practically? It means that the most powerful investment you can make in your own magnetism is not the study of technique. It is the cultivation of your inner life, the development of genuine curiosity, the courage to be authentic in a world that endlessly rewards the performed self. It means learning to listen, not just to words, but to the emotional register beneath them, to what someone is really saying when they seem to be talking about something else entirely. It means being willing to be affected by others, to let their reality land, to be moved, to be changed. Because the person who is unchangeable is, in the end, unknowable. And the unknowable, however much they may fascinate at a distance, cannot truly connect. Section 6. The Art of Seduction in the Digital Age. Robert Greene wrote The Art of Seduction in 2001. The world has changed in ways he could not entirely have anticipated. And yet, his central insights have not just survived the digital revolution, they have been weaponized by it. We now live in what the media theorist Douglas Rushkoff calls an attention economy. Fascination, the ability to hold someone's gaze, to make them come back, to make them think about you after they've looked away, has become one of the most valuable economic resources in the history of human civilization. The creators who thrive on social media intuitively apply Greene's principles, often without knowing his name. They understand mystery, the careful curation of what to reveal and what to withhold. They understand projection, the construction of a persona that allows millions of people to project their own needs and longings. They understand the ideal lover dynamic, the parasocial relationship that makes you feel, somehow, that the person speaking into a camera is speaking specifically to you. This is not coincidence. It is the ancient psychology of fascination operating at industrial scale. The most successful online creators have discovered something counterintuitive. In an age of information abundance, the scarce resource is emotional resonance. Facts are everywhere. Analysis is everywhere. What is rare is the feeling of being genuinely accompanied, of finding a voice that makes your own experience feel less lonely, less strange, less isolated. This is why parasocial relationships have become such a defining feature of modern life. Why millions of people feel genuine grief when a podcast host retires, genuine loyalty to a YouTuber they have never met, genuine identification with the personal brand of a celebrity they will never encounter. These are not delusions. They are the natural human response to the feeling of being known, however manufactured, however constructed, however partial that feeling may be. The longing is real, even when the relationship is not. And this brings us to perhaps the most important question Greene's work raises for the modern reader. In an age of constructed personas and algorithmic optimization, what does authenticity even mean? Perhaps it means this: the digital self that most resonates with others is usually the one that is most genuinely in contact with its own experience. The performance of authenticity is always detectable, always slightly hollow. Genuine vulnerability, real uncertainty, real feeling, real curiosity is still the most magnetic thing a person can project, online or off. The algorithms amplify signal, but the signal still has to come from somewhere real. The mindful reflection. We began with a question: why are some people unforgettable? We have traveled a long way since then, through the courts of ancient queens and the philosophy of human desire, through the psychology of projection and the ethics of influence, through the algorithm-haunted landscape of the modern attention economy. And perhaps the answer has grown more layered than we expected. Because the truth is, unforgettability has very little to do with being exceptional. History's most magnetic figures, Cleopatra, Casanova, Monroe, Kennedy, Ellington, were not loved because they were perfect. They were loved because, in each person's presence, something essential in the other person came alive. They saw. They responded. They reflected back a version of the world or a version of the person in front of them that felt more vivid, more meaningful, more real. We wear masks because we are afraid. We wear them to protect the vulnerable, uncertain, contradictory self that exists beneath the professional performance, beneath the social presentation, beneath the carefully constructed image we send out into the world each morning. And what we most long for, what perhaps every human being most fundamentally longs for, is to encounter someone who sees past the mask. Not to exploit what they find there, but to accept it, to be moved by it, to say, without words, I see you, the real you. And that real you is not something you need to hide. That is the most seductive thing in the world. Not beauty, not power, not wit or wealth or strategic mystery. It is the feeling of being understood. The philosopher Martin Buber spent his life thinking about the difference between what he called I-it relationships, where we treat others as objects, as means to our ends, and I-thou relationships, where we meet another person in their full humanity, where something real passes between two beings. Most of our interactions, he argued, are I-it. We are too busy, too defended, too strategic to actually meet one another. And then occasionally, rarely, unexpectedly, we encounter someone who treats us as a thou, who actually shows up to the moment, who is, in some essential way, genuinely there, and we never forget them. The Art of Seduction, read carefully and read honestly, is not a manual for manipulation. It is a mirror. It shows us what we are hungry for, what we respond to, what moves us when we allow ourselves to be moved. And in doing so, it points towards something quietly radical, that the path to becoming more magnetic, more charismatic, more genuinely present in the world runs not through technique or strategy, but through knowing yourself, your fears, your longings, your genuine curiosities, the places where you are most alive. And then having the courage to share that, selectively, honestly, with the people in front of you. Not to manipulate, to connect. That is the art. That is the only art that truly lasts. So I want to leave you with a question, and I genuinely want to know your answer. Have you ever met someone, just one person, whose presence made you feel more alive, more yourself, who made the room feel different simply by being in it? What was it about them? What quality, beneath all the surface things, actually made them unforgettable? Leave your answer in the comments, because I think when we name that quality, we get a little closer to understanding something essential about what it means to be human. And if this video made you think differently about fascination, charisma, or the psychology of human connection, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe for more deep dives into the ideas that shape the way we think, feel, and live. Until next time, be here, be present, be real.